The ice cream freezer was already turning on the back porch before the charcoal was lit. By noon, the smoke had carried 3 yards over, and every family on the block knew who was cooking and what they were making. The peach ice cream would be ready by the time the ribs came off. The hog had been on the pit since midnight. Number 14 fed a family reunion from a single bowl. The dish at number 7 took 2 days to assemble, and nobody was allowed to cut it until the host said so. And number 3 left backyard so quietly that a whole generation never tasted it. Hit subscribe, because this list is taking you back to a table you have not sat at in years. Here are 25 lost Labor Day dishes Black families made before summer ended. Number 25, smoked bologna. The whole log, not sliced, straight from the butcher counter in a plastic casing. Somebody scored the outside in a diamond pattern with a pocket knife, rubbed it with mustard and brown sugar, and laid it on the grill next to the ribs, where nobody paid it any attention until the smoke curled the edges and the sugar turned black. You sliced it thick, laid it on white bread, and ate it standing up. A whole log fed a dozen people who were too hungry to wait for the ribs. When the cookout moved to store-bought platters, the smoked bologna was the first thing cut from the menu. Nobody missed it in public. Everybody missed it in private. Number 24, smoked sausage and onions on white bread. The sausage was cheap, the bread was cheaper, and the onions came from the garden. You split the links down the middle, laid them cut side down on the grill until the casing blackened and curled, then piled thick slices of raw white onion on top. 2 slices of bread, no mustard required. The man tending the coals put sausage on before anything else and kept throwing links on until the fire died. The grill and the person standing over it were the only instructions anyone needed. When that person got too old to stand in the heat all afternoon, the sausage came from a foil tray somebody bought at the store. Everyone could taste the difference. Number 23, lemon icebox pie. No oven, no thermometer, no timer. Condensed milk, lemon juice, and a graham cracker crust pressed into a pie tin by hand. It went into the icebox after church on Sunday and came out cold and set on Monday afternoon when the yard filled up. In late August, turning on the oven on a holiday was a punishment nobody volunteered for. Icebox pie solved the problem. It tasted like lemon candy and held together just enough to slice clean. Once grocery stores started selling frozen pies and pre-made cheesecakes, the women who made icebox pie stopped being asked for it. Nobody told them the pie was no longer needed. They noticed because nobody was eating it. The pie tin went home the same weight it arrived. Number 22, watermelon rind pickles. The rinds from every melon cut open on Labor Day went into a pot instead of the trash. The green skin was peeled off, the white flesh was cubed, and the pieces were soaked overnight in salt water. The next morning, they were simmered in a syrup of sugar, vinegar, cinnamon sticks, cloves, and allspice until the cubes turned translucent and tender. A mason jar of watermelon rind pickles sat on the table between the hot sauce and the salt shaker. They were sweet, tangy, and cold, and people who had never tried them reached for a second piece before the first one was gone. When watermelon became something you bought pre-cut in a plastic container, there were no rinds left to pickle. The recipe required the whole melon, and the whole melon required somebody willing to do the cutting. Number 21, grilled pork steaks. Shoulder blade steaks, cut thick and cheap, marinated overnight in a vinegar sauce heavy on garlic, black pepper, and cayenne. They went on the grill over direct heat and cooked slow, basted with the leftover marinade until the fat rendered and the edges turned dark and crisp. Pork steaks were the cut nobody outside the Midwest and the Deep South talked about. In St. Louis, And across Mississippi and Alabama, they were the center of the plate, not the ribs. A man who smoked ribs all morning still had pork steaks on the grill by late afternoon for the people who showed up after church let out. When beef took over the American grill and pork shoulder moved to the slow cooker, the pork steak stayed behind on the butcher counter. Number 20, homemade peach ice cream, a wooden bucket, a metal canister, crushed ice, rock salt, and a hand crank that somebody turned until the arm gave out and the next person took over. The custard was cooked on the stove the night before with eggs, sugar, cream, and vanilla, then chilled overnight. Fresh peaches, peeled and mashed with sugar, folded in right before the churning started. The ice cream was ready when the crank stopped turning. The dasher came out coated in soft ice cream, and the children fought over who got to lick it clean. The finished batch was packed in the ice and covered with a towel until the meal was done. Homemade peach ice cream required peaches worth eating, and it required a full hour of labor from people willing to sit in the heat and turn a handle. When the peach orchards thinned out and the wooden bucket cracked, a carton from the store took its place on the table. It was cold, it was sweet, but nobody fought over the dasher. Number 19, pit smoked whole turkey. There was always one person at the cookout who handled the turkey, and nobody else was allowed near it. The bird went into a makeshift smoker built from a steel drum or a cinder block pit the night before, and that person stayed up tending the fire until the sun came up. Pecan wood or hickory, whatever hardwood the family could get. Salt, black pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, cayenne, and a pour of apple cider vinegar that hit the hot metal and turned to steam sweet enough to pull neighbors out of their houses at 3 a.m. The turkey that came off that pit on Labor Day afternoon looked nothing like the pale bird from a grocery store deli. The skin was dark in places, mahogany in others, and it peeled away from the breast and sheets. The meat underneath was pink from the smoke ring, and so tender you pulled it apart with your hands, standing over the table, eating before anyone fixed you a plate. That was the arrangement. The person who smoked the turkey ate first and sat down last. The roll passed down the same way the skillet passed down, not through a conversation, but through proximity. You stood next to the pit long enough, and eventually the tongs were in your hand. The smell of that turkey carried for blocks. Neighbors who were not invited showed up anyway, and nobody turned them away because a bird that size fed more people than any family needed. The extra plates were the point. Pit smoked turkey disappeared when the steel drums rusted out, and the men who knew how to keep a fire alive for 12 hours stopped being replaced. Their sons bought electric smokers and set timers on their phones. The bird came out fine, but nobody stood outside all night watching it, and nobody showed up at 3 a.m. because they smelled something. The ritual died before the recipe did. Number 18, blackberry dumplings. Wild blackberries, picked along fence rows and ditch banks in the weeks before Labor Day, stewed down with sugar and water until the juice ran deep purple. Strips of dough, rolled thin and torn by hand, dropped into the simmering berries where they puffed up and soaked through with color. Blackberry dumplings arrived at the cookout in a covered pot, still warm, spooned into bowls. The juice stained everything it touched. Children who ate them walked around the yard with purple mouths and fingers, and the woman who made them could tell from across the lawn who had been into the pot without asking. When the fence rows were cleared and the roadsides were sprayed, the berries stopped appearing. The recipe survived, but the ingredient did not come from a store. Number 17, pig ear sandwich. The ears were cleaned, boiled until tender, then sliced thin and either pickled in vinegar with hot peppers or grilled until the cartilage turned crisp. On a soft bun with hot sauce and slaw, a pig ear sandwich was the plate that separated the old guard from the young. The older men at the cookout ate them without hesitation. The children stared. Pig ears belonged to a world where every part of the hog was food, not a choice, but a fact. Butchers used to set them aside for the customers who asked. When that generation of customers stopped coming, the butchers stopped carrying them. A pig ear sandwich at the Labor Day table today would draw questions from half the people sitting there. 30 years ago, it drew nothing but a nod. Number 16, crackling bread. Pork cracklings, the crisp bits left over after rendering lard, broken into pieces and folded into a cornbread batter made with cornmeal, salt, and just enough water or buttermilk to hold it together, baked in a cast iron skillet until the crust turned hard and golden with pockets of crunchy fat buried through the center. Crackling bread showed up at the cookout wrapped in a towel inside a paper bag. You broke off a piece with your hands and ate it alongside the greens or the beans. The taste was corn and salt and pork, and the texture shifted from gritty to crisp with every bite. Crackling bread required cracklings, and cracklings required somebody who still rendered their own lard. When the lard pail disappeared from the kitchen, the cracklings went with it, and the bread lost the one ingredient that made it worth eating. Number 15, oxtail over rice. The tails were browned in batches, then braised low with onion, garlic, thyme, and enough liquid to keep them from drying out. The collagen melted into a gravy so thick it set like gelatin when it cooled. At the cookout, the pot sat on the stove inside the house, and the rice stayed warm in a second pot next to it. Oxtail was the dish that stayed indoors because it never belonged on a paper plate. The people eating it sat at the kitchen table instead of the folding chairs in the yard. When oxtail went from a cheap cut that butchers practically gave away to one of the most expensive pieces in the case, the cookout could no longer afford it. The pot got smaller every year until it stopped appearing. Number 14, macaroni salad. Not macaroni and cheese. Macaroni salad, cold elbow noodles mixed with mayonnaise, mustard, chopped celery, onion, bell pepper, hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, salt, pepper, and a heavy pour of paprika across the top. It arrived in the largest bowl in the kitchen, covered in plastic wrap, and sat on the table between the potato salad and the baked beans, where it quietly fed more people than anything else at the cookout. A single batch cost next to nothing. A pound of elbows, a jar of mayonnaise, and whatever vegetables were on hand. The woman who made it tasted the dressing 3 times before she committed, added something different each time, and never wrote any of it down. Every family's macaroni salad tasted different, and every family believed theirs was the only correct version. Arguments about whose was better ran longer than the cookout itself. Macaroni salad was the food nobody praised out loud, but everybody went back for. You could tell whose bowl it was by how fast it emptied. An untouched bowl at the end of the night was an insult nobody delivered on purpose, and the woman who brought it never brought the same recipe again. The dish still exists, but the version that disappeared was the one made by someone who had been making it the same way for 30 years and adjusted the seasoning based on who was coming. She knew that her brother liked it sweeter and her neighbor liked it sharper, and the dressing that went into that bowl on Labor Day was calibrated to the exact group of people sitting in that yard. That bowl held 40 years of knowing who would show up and what they wanted. Store-bought macaroni salad is food. What she made was something closer to a census, a record of every person she expected to feed. Number 13, red drink. A plastic pitcher filled with Kool-Aid mixed so strong the sugar settled at the bottom if you did not stir it hard enough. Cherry, tropical punch, or grape, depending on who made it, and always cold enough to sweat through the pitcher before the first cup was poured. Red drink was not on the menu. Nobody asked for it. It was already there, sitting on the end of the table next to a sleeve of foam cups, and every child at the cookout drank it until the pitcher was empty and somebody mixed another batch. The adults drank it too, between beers, standing in the shade. When bottled sodas and juice boxes replaced the pitcher, the red drink faded without a goodbye. The pitcher went under the sink and stayed there. Nobody announced a switch. The foam cups just stopped being set out. Number 12, boiled peanuts. Green peanuts, still damp from the ground, boiled in salt water for hours in a stock pot on the porch until the shells turned soft and the nuts inside were tender and briny. A bowl of them sat on the table all afternoon, and you cracked them open with your teeth, sucked the salt water out of the shell, and dropped the empties into a paper bag at your feet. Boiled peanuts were the food that kept people standing around talking. You could not eat them fast. Each one required 2 hands and a minute of work, and the conversation that happened over a bowl of boiled peanuts lasted longer than the conversation over any other dish at the cookout. Green peanuts only showed up at roadside stands and farm markets for a few weeks in late summer. When nobody in the family drove past those stands anymore, the boiled peanuts stopped appearing and the conversations that went with them got shorter. Number 11, cucumber and onion salad. Garden cucumbers, sliced thin, layered with rings of white onion in a shallow bowl, covered in white vinegar, water, sugar, salt, and cracked black pepper. The bowl went into the icebox the night before and came to the table so cold the vinegar bit the back of your throat on the first bite. Cucumber and onion salad was the dish that sat in the sun all afternoon and nobody worried about it. No mayonnaise, no eggs, nothing that turned in the heat. It stayed sharp and crisp from the first plate to the last, and the vinegar at the bottom of the bowl was the best part, soaked into a piece of cornbread or poured over rice. When the garden cucumbers stopped coming in because nobody was tending the rows anymore, the salad moved to store-bought cucumbers wrapped in plastic. The crunch was the same, the taste was close, but the woman who made it could tell the difference between a cucumber she grew and one she bought, and she mentioned it every time. Number 10, stewed field peas and snaps, purple hull peas or crowder peas, shelled by hand on the front porch the day before, cooked slow with a ham hock, salt, pepper, and enough water to make a broth dark enough to drink on its own. The snaps were the green pods too young to shell, broken by hand and thrown into the pot with the peas. Field peas and snaps fed more people per dollar than anything else in the yard. Shelling a grocery bag full of peas took an hour of sitting and talking, and the people who did it treated the work as part of the gathering, not preparation for it. When the peas moved from a garden row to a freezer bag, the shelling stopped. The porch conversation that came with it stopped at the same time. Number 9, cornbread salad. Leftover cornbread crumbled into a bowl and layered with chopped tomatoes, onion, bell pepper, bacon, and ranch dressing or mayonnaise. It sat in the icebox overnight, so the cornbread soaked up the dressing and held together just enough to scoop with a spoon. Cornbread salad was the dish that used what was already sitting on the counter. Day-old cornbread, the end of a tomato, half an onion. The woman who invented it in her kitchen did not call it a salad. She called it using things up. The name came later when somebody asked what it was, and she needed an answer. The dish disappeared with the leftover cornbread. When cornbread stopped being made from scratch every other day, there were no leftovers to repurpose. Number 8, crab boil. In coastal families, from the Chesapeake down through the Carolinas and across the Gulf, Labor Day meant a boil. Blue crabs, shrimp, corn on the cob, potatoes, and smoked sausage dumped into a pot of water seasoned with enough cayenne and bay leaf to burn the back of your throat from across the yard. The pot was big enough that 2 people had to carry it. The food got dumped onto a table covered in newspaper, and everyone stood around it eating with their hands. A crab boil required access to the water. Somebody in the family knew where the crabs were, owned the traps, or knew the man who sold them off the dock for cash. When that connection broke, when the family moved inland or the waterman retired, the boil moved to a restaurant. The newspaper on the table was replaced by a menu. There is a question buried in this list that nobody at the table ever asked out loud. How much of the food costs money and how much of it costs time? A watermelon rind pickle cost the price of patience and a jar. A pig ear cost pennies because nobody else wanted it. The peach ice cream existed because someone sat in the heat and cranked the handle until the custard froze. The economics of the Labor Day cookout ran on a currency that grocery stores do not stock. The cost was measured in hours, standing at a stove, mornings spent in a garden, afternoons spent cracking peas on the porch and turning the ice cream crank until it seized. When that labor stopped, the food did not get more expensive. It got impossible. The ingredients are all still for sale. The woman who turned them into a feast is not. Number 7, lane cake. 3 or 4 layers of white cake stacked tall with a filling made from egg yolks, butter, sugar, raisins, pecans, and a generous pour of bourbon or whiskey cooked together on the stove until the mixture thickened. The filling went between each layer while it was still warm, and a white frosting covered the outside so you could not see what was hiding inside until the first slice was cut. Lane cake was a celebration cake, not an everyday cake. It required a full morning to assemble, and the woman who made it started the night before, soaking the raisins in liquor until they swelled and turned soft. The bourbon flavor baked into the filling was strong enough that children were not given a full slice, and the adults who ate it knew they were eating something that cost more time than money. The cake has roots in Alabama, where it was first published in a community cookbook over a century ago. It traveled across the Deep South through church suppers and family reunions, and by the middle of the last century, it had earned a permanent place on the Labor Day dessert table in families that considered the holiday worth the effort. Lane cake disappeared when the effort stopped being worth it to the next generation. The raisin and nut filling required judgment that recipes could not teach. Pour too much bourbon and the layers slid apart. Cook the filling too long and it turned to candy. The women who got it right carried decades of practice in their hands, and when they put the cake pans away for good, nobody picked them up. A box cake with store-bought frosting took its place on the table. Everyone ate it. Nobody talked about it on the way home. Number 6, socket to me cake, a dense butter cake with a swirl of cinnamon, brown sugar, and pecans running through the center, baked in a bundt pan and turned out onto a plate still warm. A thin glaze of powdered sugar and milk dripped over the top and ran down the ridges of the pan while the cake cooled on the counter. Socket to me cake traveled well. It went to the cookout in the same bundt pan it was baked in, covered in foil, and sat on the dessert end of the table all afternoon without losing its shape. You sliced it with a butter knife and ate it with your hands. The cinnamon streak through the middle was the part everyone looked for, and the woman who baked it knew exactly how much filling to use, so the swirl showed up in every slice. The cake lost its place on the table when the bundt pan got shoved to the back of the cabinet, and the woman who owned it stopped being asked to bring dessert. The women who cooked for these gatherings ate last. That was the rule in every family, and nobody said it out loud because nobody had to. The woman who started before dawn, who seasoned the greens, rolled the dough, watched the oil, stirred the pot, and covered every dish to keep the flies off. She made a plate for everyone else before she made one for herself. She ate standing at the counter or sitting on the back steps while the yard was still full of noise. When those women got old and tired and stopped cooking the Labor Day meal, the family tried to fill the gap with trays from a restaurant and boxes from a store. They replaced the food. They could not replace what held it together: the knowledge of who liked what, the instinct for how much to make, and the willingness to eat last and never say a word about it. Number 5, poke salad. Wild pokeweed, picked young from the edges of fields and ditches before the leaves grew too large and turned toxic. The greens were boiled 3 times in fresh water to pull the poison out, drained hard, and finished in a skillet with bacon grease and scrambled egg stirred through. Poke salad was a foraged food that only showed up at the cookout if somebody in the family still knew where it grew and when to pick it safely. That knowledge was not written in any book. It lived in the body of the person who had been walking the same roadsides since childhood and could tell edible from dangerous at a glance. When the land was paved or fenced or sold, the pokeweed kept growing on the other side of the property line. The person who used to pick it drove past it and left it standing. Number 4, neck bone purloo. Smoked pork neck bones, browned hard in a heavy pot, then simmered with onion, garlic, bell pepper, and rice cooked directly in the meat broth until every grain swelled up and turned dark from the stock. The rice on the bottom of the pot crusted and stuck, and that crust, scraped up with a spoon and mixed into the rest, was the best part. Purloo was low country cooking, stretching a small amount of meat across a crowd by letting the rice do the work. A few pounds of neck bones and a bag of rice fed a table of 15 without anyone noticing the portion was small, because the flavor in every spoonful made the serving feel larger than it was. When neck bones stopped being the cheapest cut at the counter, the math that made purloo possible changed. The dish cost more to make than it used to, and the families that relied on it found cheaper ways to fill a pot. Number 3, whole hog barbecue. The pit was dug in the yard on Saturday morning. Cinder blocks lined the sides, a metal grate went across the top, and a whole dressed hog was laid out flat over a bed of hardwood coals. The cooking took the better part of a full day. Someone stayed up all night, keeping the temperature steady, adding coals, spraying vinegar on the skin. By Labor Day afternoon, the hog was done. The skin crackled when broken, and the meat underneath fell apart without a knife. People lined up, and the pitmaster pulled the pork by hand, mixing lean with fat, piling it on plates. Whole hog barbecue required a pit, a yard, a hog, a full day, and a person who knew the fire. It was the most labor-intensive dish at any cookout, and the first to vanish when yards shrank, neighborhoods shifted, and city codes made open pit fires a violation. Number 2, muscadine hull pie. Wild muscadine grapes, thick-skinned and musky, gathered from vines that climbed the trees at the edge of the woods. The hulls were separated from the pulp, boiled soft in sugar water, and stirred into a pie filling that tasted nothing like any grape from a grocery store. The seeds were strained out, and the filling went into a pastry crust and baked until the top browned and the juice bubbled through the slits. Muscadine hull pie showed up at cookouts across the rural South, wherever the vines still grew wild. The season was short, a few weeks in late August and September, and the fruit had to be gathered by hand because nothing about a muscadine was built for a machine. The vines still grow. They fruit every September along fences and tree lines from Virginia to East Texas. The grapes drop and split on the ground, and the wasps find them before anyone else does. The last generation that made hull pie knew the vines by location the way they knew the roads, without a map. Number 1, the goodbye plate. This was not a recipe. It was the last act of the cookout. When the sun was down and people started saying they had to leave, someone went to the kitchen and started fixing plates. Aluminum foil wrapped tight over a paper plate loaded with everything that was left. A piece of chicken, 2 ribs, a spoonful of potato salad, a square of cornbread, a slice of cake balanced on top. The goodbye plate went home with every person who walked out the door. It was the dish that turned a meal into something larger. You belong to this family, even when you leave. The goodbye plate disappeared when the cookout itself got smaller, when foil trays replaced homemade food, when the woman who fixed the plates got too tired to stand. Nobody announced that the goodbye plate was finished. One year there were plates for everyone. The next year, there were not. The smoke is gone, but the yard remembers where the pit stood. Black families still gather every Labor Day, still fill a yard with noise, still pass plates over the fence to neighbors who did not ask. But the table is lighter than it used to be. 25 dishes have gone quiet, and the hands that made them are not coming back to show anyone how. Number 22, smoked neck bones and green beans. A pot of green beans in a black kitchen in the 1960s was never just green beans. It started with smoked neck bones dropped into water and simmered until the meat pulled from the bone, filling the kitchen with the kind of smell that carried to the front porch. The green beans went in after the broth turned dark with pork fat. They cooked low and slow for 2 hours until the beans were soft enough to fall apart. Summer was peak season because the beans came straight from the garden, snapped by hand on the porch while children played in the yard. A bowl of those beans was a full meal with cornbread. People who never grew up on them called them overcooked. The families who ate them never asked for a second opinion. Number 24, egg and tomato scramble. Ripe tomatoes, chopped rough, dropped into a skillet with a little butter, and cooked down just until they softened. Then 3 or 4 eggs, cracked right on top, stirred through, scrambled loose with salt and pepper, and maybe a dash of hot sauce. Served over rice or scooped up with a piece of bread, it was a full supper in 10 minutes. Big Mama made this when the garden tomatoes came in faster than anyone could eat them whole. The acid from the tomatoes cut the richness of the eggs, and the whole thing tasted brighter than it had any right to for something built from 2 ingredients and a skillet. Nobody wrote it down. It was the kind of cooking that happened by instinct. Before the rest of the house stirred, there was tomato gravy simmering on the back burner, and you could smell the bacon fat cutting through the sharpness of canned tomatoes from under your blanket. The dish needed nothing expensive, just drippings saved in the coffee can by the stove, a tablespoon of flour stirred until it browned, and a can of stewed tomatoes crushed by hand into the skillet. A pinch of sugar took the acid down. The gravy was poured thick over white rice and eaten with a spoon, sometimes alongside fried eggs or salt pork. It came from Depression-era black kitchens where 1 can of tomatoes fed a household of 8, and it traveled north to Detroit and Chicago inside the memories of women who never stopped cooking it. Through the 70s, it held on as a weekday standard, the kind nobody wrote down. You made it the way your mother showed you, and if you asked for measurements, she would shake her head and say, "Pour until it looks right." Number 20, butter beans with ham hocks. Butter beans were the quiet workhorse of the summer garden. They grew fast, produced heavy, and dried well for storage. Black families in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia shelled them on the porch in the evening, dropping the pale green beans into a bowl while the empty pods piled into a paper sack. The cooking started with a smoked ham hock and water. The beans simmered for an hour until the potlikker thickened into a gravy that soaked through cornbread like butter. A pot of butter beans fed a large family for 2 days and cost less than the gas to cook them. The ham hock was often the only purchased meat that week, used first in the beans, then boiled again for the greens, then picked clean for stock. Some families dropped a dry red pepper in for heat, others let the smoke do the talking. Either way, the sound at the table was the same, spoons scraping the bottom of the bowl. Here is something worth saying out loud. The summer garden in a black household in the 1960s South was not a hobby, it was an economic system. A quarter-acre plot behind the house produced tomatoes, okra, cucumbers, green beans, butter beans, and sweet potatoes from May through October. The seeds came from last year's crop, saved in paper bags on the pantry shelf. The fertilizer came from kitchen scraps and chicken manure. The labor was family labor, divided by age. Children weeded, teenagers picked, grandmothers canned. A family of 8 could eat fresh vegetables for 5 months without spending $1 at the store. When the season ended, the canning began, and those jars carried the garden through winter. The grocery chains that moved into black neighborhoods in the 1970s did not offer anything better. They just made it easier to forget what had been there all along. Number 21, buttermilk and crumbled cornbread. A tall glass of cold buttermilk with leftover cornbread broken into chunks and dropped straight in. Big Mama ate this, standing at the counter with a long spoon, scooping up the soft pieces that sank to the bottom. It was not a recipe. It was what happened when the kitchen was too hot to light a burner and the cornbread from yesterday was going stale on the counter. The buttermilk was thick and tangy. The cornbread soaked it up and turned soft without falling apart completely. Children made faces at it. Grown folks who had worked outside all day drank it down without stopping. A glass of buttermilk and cornbread at the end of a long July afternoon was the oldest supper in the South, and it never needed a stove, a plate, or a single minute of cooking. Monday meant pinto beans in every black kitchen that remembered the South, and the ritual started the night before, sorting dry beans on a table, picking out the stones, leaving them to soak in cold water overnight. By morning, they were swollen. Your mother set them on a low flame with a ham hock, quartered onion, garlic, and water to cover by 2 inches. The pot stayed there all day. Monday was wash day. In New Orleans, red beans and rice on Monday was law, and beans could simmer unwatched while laundry got done on the board or hauled to the laundromat. By evening, they had broken into a thick, creamy broth that clung to cornbread. A bowl cost almost nothing and fed everyone. The woman who seasoned them knew the salt went in late because adding it early toughened the skins. She carried that timing in her hands. When she stopped cooking, Mondays never tasted the same. If beans simmered all day on one burner, the other belonged to whatever the garden gave. Number 24, fried okra. Okra hit its peak in July and August, and black families fried it the same way their great-grandmothers had since before the Civil War. The pods were sliced thin, rolled in cornmeal, seasoned with salt and pepper, and dropped into a cast iron skillet with enough lard or bacon grease to come halfway up the sides. The trick was oil temperature. Too cool and the cornmeal turned soggy. Too hot and the outside burned before the inside cooked through. A grandmother who had done it for 40 years never needed a thermometer. She flicked a pinch of cornmeal into the grease and listened. Okra came to North America through the slave trade, carried from West Africa. By the 1960s, it grew in nearly every black garden south of the Mason-Dixon line, and frying it was as natural as breathing. Number 22, sardines and crackers with hot sauce. Big Mama pulled a flat tin from the pantry shelf, peeled back the lid, and set it on the table next to a sleeve of saltines and a bottle of Louisiana hot sauce. No stove, no skillet, no heat of any kind. The sardines were salty and oily, packed with enough flavor to stand alone. She laid one across a cracker, hit it with a shake of hot sauce, and ate it, standing at the counter while the children assembled their own plates. A tin kept in the pantry for months without spoiling. On the worst nights in August, when the air pressed heavy and still and nobody wanted to move, sardines and crackers solved the problem without asking a single thing of the kitchen. And in late summer, nothing came sweeter than fried corn cut straight off the cob. Your grandmother held each ear upright in a wide bowl, ran a sharp knife down the rows, then went back with the dull side of the blade and scraped hard. That scraping was everything. It pulled the milky starch inside each row, and that liquid turned fried corn creamy without a drop of cream. The kernels went into bacon grease, always bacon grease, never butter, because butter burned too fast, and cooked low, stirring constantly until the corn thickened and clung to the spoon. Salt, black pepper. Some cooks added sugar if the corn was starchy, but the old women said if you needed sugar, you picked it too late. It tasted like August, hot, golden, and gone before you were ready. Number 23, cucumber and onion salad. This was the dish that showed up cold on the table when the kitchen was too hot to stand in. Thin sliced cucumbers and white onions sat in a bowl of white vinegar, water, sugar, and salt, chilled until the rings went translucent. Some families added hot sauce, others floated tomato slices on top. The recipe required no heat, no oven, and no standing over a stove, which made it the default side on the worst days of August. A cucumber from the garden, an onion from the pantry, vinegar from the shelf. The bowl sat on the table all day, passed from hand to hand as people came through the kitchen, and nobody complained about leftovers. It got better the longer it sat. By evening, the cucumbers had gone almost translucent, soaked through with vinegar and sweetness. Number 25, fried potatoes and onions. A cast iron skillet, a few potatoes peeled and sliced thin, half an onion cut into rings, and a spoonful of bacon grease. That was supper. Big Mama got the grease smoking hot, laid the potatoes in a single layer, and let them sit until the bottoms turned golden and crisp. Then the onions went in. She flipped everything once, maybe twice, seasoned with salt and pepper, and covered the skillet to let the steam finish the work. The potatoes came out creamy inside and crunchy outside, tangled up with soft, sweet onion. Children ate this with white bread and ketchup. Adults ate it straight off the skillet with a fork. A 5-pound bag of potatoes lasted a week in the pantry, and on a hot Tuesday night, a full skillet of fried potatoes fed the house for the cost of almost nothing. Salmon croquettes were the Friday night constant in black kitchens across the South and every city the Great Migration touched. A can of pink salmon, bones left in and crushed into the mix for calcium, a trick passed down without ever hearing the word nutrition. The salmon was flaked with a fork, folded with cracker crumbs, egg, diced onion, and black pepper. Some cooks added hot sauce, others stirred in yellow mustard, and that difference was the line between one family's recipe and another's. The patties hit a cast iron skillet of shimmering Crisco, and the sizzle was the dinner bell. You heard it from the porch. Golden and crisp outside, warm and soft in the center, they came with grits or white rice. You could follow the recipe exactly today, but without her standing over that skillet in her housecoat, flipping them with a fork she never washed between batches, they will never taste the same. Number 19, peach cobbler. Peach cobbler was the dessert that started fights, the kind of argument families carried for decades about whose crust was flakier and whose grandmother held the only correct recipe. In the 1960s, Nearly every black household in the rural South had a peach tree in the yard or a neighbor's, producing more fruit than any family could eat. The cobbler was built in a cast iron skillet greased thick with butter. Flour, butter, sugar, and milk went in the bottom, and sliced peaches tossed with sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg went on top. The batter rose around the fruit as it baked into a golden shell that cracked when a spoon pressed through it, and the juice pooled into a warm syrup that tasted like the whole summer in one bite. Church suppers in July were quietly judged by the cobbler table, and the women who won never said a word. By the 1980s, canned peaches replaced fresh in most kitchens, and the cobbler from those cans tasted flat and metallic. The recipe is not lost. The trees are: number 23, fried bologna sandwich. A thick slice of bologna, 2 slits in the center so it lay flat, dropped into a hot skillet with a little oil until the edges curled and the surface browned crispy. White bread, yellow mustard. That was the whole meal. On the hottest nights across the South, when standing over a stove for more than 5 minutes felt like a sentence, this was what appeared on the table. It was fast, it was cheap. Children loved it without being told to. A fried bologna sandwich with a handful of chips and a cold glass of Kool-Aid turned a miserable August evening into something a child carried with them for decades. Smothered chicken with onion gravy turned the cheapest parts of the bird into something that made grown men go quiet at the table. In the 1970s, whole chickens cost less than $1 a pound, and your mother stretched one across Sunday dinner and Monday lunch. She seasoned thighs and legs with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged them in flour, and browned them in cast iron until the crust went deep gold. The chicken came out. Thick sliced onions went in, sizzling in the drippings until they collapsed into something sweet. Flour went back into the fat, stirred fast, then broth hit the pan in a rush of steam that fogged the windows. The chicken returned, the lid came down, and the whole thing simmered an hour until the meat slid off the bone. Spooned over white rice, the gravy soaked through every grain. You knew it was done when the smell changed from sharp to deep and round. Only the person at the stove could read that moment. Number 25, tomato sandwich. The simplest summer dish in the Black South started with a tomato still warm from the vine, a thick slice of white bread, a smear of mayonnaise, a tomato cut heavy enough to bend the bread, and a hard shake of salt. That was the whole recipe. In the 1960s, a garden tomato cost nothing. Families in Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia grew them by the bushel along fence lines and beside the porch steps. Children ate them like apples, straight off the vine with salt in their pockets. The supermarket tomato that replaced it was bred for shipping durability and picked green. It looked the same. It tasted like cardboard. Anyone who has eaten both knows the difference without needing a laboratory to confirm it. Number 20, skillet Crowder peas with ham hock. Crowder peas, darker and earthier than their black-eyed cousins, simmered in a heavy pot with a smoked ham hock and onion and water to cover. Big Mama started the pot in the late morning and let it go on low heat through the afternoon. By supper time, the peas had turned thick and creamy. The ham hock had given up its meat and its smoke into the broth, and the whole house smelled like something that took all day because it did. A bowl of Crowder peas over rice with a piece of cornbread on the side was a full meal that asked for nothing else. The peas came dried from the store or fresh from the garden, and either way, they stretched a single ham hock into 2 or 3 nights of supper without complaint. Stewed tomatoes and okra carried a lineage stretching back to West Africa, where okra brought to the Americas inside the hulls of slave ships, had thickened soups and stews for centuries. In black kitchens of the 1970s, it cost pennies and fed the spirit like a feast. Fresh okra was sliced into rounds and fried first in a hot skillet until the slime cooked off and the edges crisped. That step separated the cooks who knew from the ones who did not. Canned tomatoes went in next, crushed with a wooden spoon, along with onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. The pot simmered until the okra was tender and the tomatoes had thickened into a sauce that was tangy, savory, and rich. Served over rice, it was a full meal. Served alongside fried fish, it was a celebration. The women who grew that okra in their backyard plots knew exactly which pods to pick, no longer than a finger because anything bigger turned woody. That knowledge came from watching, not reading. Number 21, watermelon rind pickles. Nothing went to waste in a black kitchen, and watermelon was no exception. After the red flesh was eaten, the rind was peeled, cubed, and soaked overnight in salt water. The next morning it simmered with vinegar, sugar, cinnamon sticks, and cloves until it turned glassy and sweet, then packed into mason jars and sealed. These pickles showed up at church suppers, reunions, and 4th of July cookouts. They tasted like nothing the grocery store ever sold because the grocery store threw the rind away. A single watermelon produced a pound of pickles, and in a good summer, a family put up a dozen jars. They lined the pantry shelves like proof that nothing in this house went to waste. The women who made them could stretch $1 further than any accountant, and they never needed a lesson in sustainability. Try one this weekend. Smoke the bologna. Crank the ice cream freezer. Shell a bag of purple hulls on the porch and see who sits down to help. Drop the dish your family brought every Labor Day in the comments. Name it. Put it on the record before the recipe goes quiet. One table that held everything. One summer that ended without anyone saying so.